Everyone has moments in life they can't just stop thinking about. They can be embarrassing things, like that one time you face planted in front of a group of teenagers, or something amazing like the first time you hosted your family for the holidays. And on Baby, This is Keke Palmer, hosted by me, Keke Palmer, and presented by BMW, we know to savor the good memories and let go of the bad. And one thing everyone remembers fondly is their first time behind the wheel of a BMW. So come join me and BMW this summer as we explore pop culture moments and topics you just can't stop thinking about on Baby, This is Keke Palmer, sponsored by BMW, the ultimate driving machine.
Acast powers the world's best podcasts. Here's a show that we recommend.
What is The Briefing Room? It's a behind-the-scenes look at how the criminal justice system works and the lives of the people within that system.
If you love true crime, well, these are the real people who do the job every day of making sure justice is served.
Hi, I'm Detective Dave.
I'm Detective Dan. Together we have decades of experience in local law enforcement, a profession that we think is often misunderstood.
So we're going to explore how to do it right, and we won't shy away from when it's done wrong. These are stories you'll hear nowhere else. Unique, frank, and unvarnished.
From the team that brought you Small Town Dicks, this is The Briefing Room. Episode 1 drops on August 30th.
We'll meet you in the briefing room.
Acast helps creators launch, grow, and monetize their podcasts everywhere. Acast.com.
And welcome back to Scarred for Life, the podcast where we open up old wounds by looking back at the films that scared us as kids. I'm Terry.
And I'm Mary Beth.
In each episode, our special guest brings with them a movie that traumatized them as a child.
This week, our guest is Camille Griffin. She's a writer and a director whose feature debut, Silent Night, is currently streaming on VOD. Welcome to the show, Camille.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you. I just want to say, Scarred for Life is such a good title.
Oh,
thank you.
It should be Scarred in Childhood for Life. I'm joking.
Yes, there you go.
It's a good title. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us. So what we like to do in the beginning is sort of take our listeners to the beginning. How did you get introduced to horror?
Are we talking about cinematic horror or horror in general?
However you interpret the question.
I think I got interpreted to the cinema or horror or film. I mean, as a kid, I'm much older than you both, but as a kid, we didn't have VHS players. I think the first VHS player came, I won't do that boring thing again, when I was a child, 50, 100 years ago. There wasn't the internet, but there wasn't the internet. But they weren't VHS. We had 3 channels. I remember when they brought out Channel 4 in the UK, that was like, wow, one more channel, amazing. But they did show films, and my dad was an animator.
Oh.
And yeah, he animated, and he had a rather kind of sick kind of obsession with war movies. Not sick, I shouldn't say sick. So we watched a lot of good war movies. And what I haven't mentioned actually, because actually the one film that really, really, really traumatized me, but I can only remember one scene, which is why we're not talking about it, was a film called The Passage with Malcolm McDowell, and he plays a Nazi, and he cuts off a guy's fingers, I think. Anyway, that probably was my first introduction to horror, and I was like, but my parents were divorced, and I didn't want to upset my dad. I was a bit like, but that took a lot to recover from. But yeah, my introduction to horror really was, I suppose, wanting to lean into the kind of more kind of the darker side of the world, because I knew instinctively as a kid that things weren't, I didn't wear pink as a child and flowers in my hair. I probably wish I had done, but I was a bit of a tomboy. And so I had a relationship with the darker side of things, naturally. So I can talk about I can carry on with the kind of films that touched me. And
yeah, please do.
Well, I remember also watching The Omen for the first time. And I was like, that must be me. And I remember looking in my head for for any
the 666 behind your ear.
Are you sure I'm not evil, Mom? Anyway, I wasn't evil, but I remember thinking, why would my parents love me very much? Maybe I'm Damien. They just want to kill him, don't they, in The Omen? But I love the Omen movies. And see, I told you, Dark and Twisted, traumatized from childhood.
Love it.
Fucking love it.
So I love the Omen movies. And then I remember being in bed one morning as a kid, and this black crow knocking on my window. And I was like, wow, the devil's going to get me. So I definitely, I didn't want to watch horror. I just think it was kind of lingering in the background. And then I'd sit down but really actually all I wanted to watch was Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark as a kid. But
That's a great movie too.
that was kind of scary, I suppose, A lot of Nazis in my childhood.
Yeah, I was going to say.
I was going to say, there's a trend. A lot of Nazis.
And actually, I went to boarding school very young, and in our boarding school, which I admire them for, but I think we were probably a bit too young, as they showed us a documentary on Belsen when I was about 8 or 9. So I think probably, if I'm really honest, that's probably where the horror started, was watching a documentary on a concentration camp.
Oh,
so,
jeez.
which was really obviously an important part of our childhood. And all the parents had to sign the document, but I think they didn't watch it first. But yes, so that's probably where it started, was knowing that bad shit happens.
Bad shit does happen.
Not to put it all on the Germans. Obviously, we put it on the Russians in the movie, but not to put it all on the Germans. I read someone last night. Why are you so mean about the Russians? He says, don't blame it all on the Russians,
Yeah.
Wait, someone really wrote, why are you so mean to the Anyway, that's something. So I'm curious then, what draws you to the genre as an adult?
Well, I feel like a bit of a fake because I didn't know I was making a horror film.
Oh, okay.
I'm really actually kind of impressed that the horror community have welcomed our film. I knew that the third act was going to be horror. I knew we were going to go from Christmas comedy to drama to horror. And as we were editing the film, I was saying to Matthew, well, I think we made a horror film. I think this is a horror film. But I think what's made it so much of a horror film is obviously the landscape we're in today. So I can't really say, maybe I did. I mean, I went to see, I'm going around in circles, but basically in my journey of trying to make films, at one point I went to meet one of the funders in the UK, one of the head of the kind of mini studios, and she said, "You're funny. Write a comedy. Write a horror. We need horrors." So maybe unconsciously I went away and thought I'm going to write a funny horror, but I didn't. I wasn't like, oh, I'm going to be part of the horror community. So feel very, very lucky to have been invited into this community, and I think it's kind of cool. So yes, I always wanted to make horror films ever since I was a kid. But I've always been a bit screwed in the head, so I suppose that counts. All horror movie makers screwed in the head, maybe. Yeah. Yeah, I've even got the lighting. Yeah.
Oh, I love that.
Does that answer that question?
It sure does.
It does. It sure does.
Okay, so it doesn't sound like you were expecting to make a horror film, but do you like horror as an adult? Do you watch horror?
I love horror films, but I'm terrified. No, that's what I'm saying. Generally speaking, for me, I love cinema. So I one of my favorite ever movies was Rosemary's Baby. I mean, I'm obsessed with Polanski. Yeah. I named Roman after Polanski. I know that's very un-PC, but he was one of the greatest filmmakers that really. And Haneke. I mean, I suppose you could say Haneke is a horror.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
So really, if I'm honest, I don't know. I just thought I was into French cinema, but actually, really, I suppose if we analyze it, I'm definitely into French horror cinema. The kind of intellectual. I'm not calling myself an intellectual, but very much. Haneke was probably my greatest. I can't really say influence because I wish I could say I was influenced. I was influenced by him. He was my greatest influence. I admire him tremendously. And Polanski. And I remember watching Lucas Middleton's earlier films. Did you ever watch Lilia Forever?
No, I don't think I have.
No, I have not.
Yeah, that's like a social horror. I suppose they're like social horror movies, I suppose.
I love social horror movies. That's our favorite.
Yeah. And then, but the idea, I went to see, was it in the forest when they made no money? The witch, Blair Witch. Excellent. But what traumatized me the most was the kid in the corner, not to like total spoiler. So that's where my horror mind goes to, is the psychological horror. So, but the actual like jump scare, I mean, I have to forward wind all those. We watched Squid Game, which I thought was incredible. And I was like, okay, pause, forward, during all the splatting and the concrete. I mean, all the, and when we watched it, I was like, I can time the jump scares. I'm like, and it's coming now, and duck, so I'm not very good at, what did we try to see the other day? My husband told us to watch, Ben, are you there somewhere? No, he's run off because I was horrible earlier. Poor thing. He told us to watch, Oh, it was one of the very, very early kind of, they're in a cabin and they get eaten by the woods. What was it called?
Evil Dead?
The Sam Raimi movie.
Evil Dead.
Oh yeah, Evil Dead.
Evil Dead.
We got 20 minutes in and I was like, okay, I can't do this. We can't. I'm too scared.
I love that.
Wow, that's incredible.
Yeah, I'm not good with slasher horror. I suppose, is that slasher?
Like gory. You don't like a lot of gore either. You're not a gory horror kind of person?
I think when you live in the world, in my mind, when you live in this mind, which I think is probably quite healthy, but also so much in touch with neurosis and and fear and paranoia, and it gets too much. I take it. It's quite a lot for me. I can't just go, oh, that was fun, turn it off. So I think the slasher, they're coming to get you in your sleep.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about Silent Night.
Yes.
Your movie. So for our listeners who are unfamiliar, can you tell them a little bit about what the movie is about?
Well, the movie is intended to be for everyone who doesn't get it out there. No, the movie is a satire. Is a satire parody of the Christmas comedy, the Christmas. We call it the working title film in the UK because Working Title is a studio that makes, Emma and Love Actually and For Weddings and Funerals,
okay.
the Richard Curtis. So we call that genre like the working title genre in a sense. But, the Christmas comedy is not Hallmark, but it's like everyone's happy and silly and daft and posh. And so it's a parody of the British privileged classes and how they have to face imminent death on Christmas Eve. Christmas Day.
What I love about this film is the way that it starts out, like you said, as a sort of a Christmas comedy, and it's one of those sort of like
you got the Michael Bublé at the beginning.
Yeah, you got Michael Bublé. You have like everyone coming together for that awkward Christmas, and it's like everyone's coming together for inside this house, and it's always going to be awkward. Christmas is always an awkward time whenever you get like if you have a large family, an extended family, and everyone together. And so I love that that's there, and then that kind of kernel of humor continues through the entire movie in very subtle ways. But what really blew me away about this movie is this one moment, and this is a slight spoiler, but I'm going to try to talk around it, where Matthew Good at the very end is trying to run around to get a can of soda for his kids.
Yes.
And that is one of my favorite moments of this film because it balances sort of like that dark comedy and also the absolute abject horror of what's really going on in this situation. And I was kind of curious how you walked that line.
Well, I think for me that's everything's an exaggeration. I think there's real truth in the film, but like I said, as a kind of satire parody of this group of people, everything's obviously an exaggeration. So I think what's funny about the British culture is that terrible things are happening, but they say, don't worry, darling, sit down and make you a cup of tea. So it's very, very British that everything has to be nice and tidy and perfect and really lovely. But, the shit's hitting the fan, literally. So I think for me, that was a perfect example of trying to keep things together when the most dreadful thing in the world is about to happen. And if you focus on trying to keep the thing together, it's like when you see all these apocalyptic movies, I love the kind of, I think we reference in the film The Day After Tomorrow, or,
The Road, when she talks about the road. I've seen The Road. I can't survive The Road.
Yeah, I'm terrified of The Road. I watch The Road and I'm like, oh, I can't live like, I genuinely, those are my lines. Like, I could never live in The Road. It's far
I'm literally
too
like, honestly, just end me. I can't do it. There's no surviving. I'll just be out. Like, it's cool. I don't need to find out what that life is like.
Exactly. I don't need to. I definitely don't. All wrapped up in those lots of dirty jumpers and never washing and everything. Literally the monochrome. It's like, oh, please. So I think that's a good example of them trying to keep things together, really, And I think, sorry, what I was going to say is when you watch those big action movies, like what was the one with Aerosmith where Bruce Willis and
Armageddon?
Armageddon, everyone's always trying to kind of like destroy the asteroid or get on planes or spaceships and go to Mars, or the fact is that's their equivalent. They're just trying to get the drink right, They can't stop the comet. They can't blow up the threat to humankind. They can only just make their kids, give them something. They're not the best parents in the world. They are trying with everything they have. I think there's something kind of extraordinary about the characters because they're pretty dreadful on one, but also very much capable of love and they're doing their best. I feel for them. But they were intended to be a bit of a parody of that class system.
Yeah, I was going to say those characters are both the worst, but also sympathetic at the same time. Like there are points where you're like, oh wow, I really do feel for you, especially Annabelle Wallis's character with her stepdaughter, like, give me the hug, give me a hug. And like, I've had a stepmom that's like that. And it's like, you're like, please leave me the fuck alone. But at the same time, I don't know, like the cast is incredible too. And like, I'm curious, this leads to my question actually of like, what was it like working with this incredible ensemble cast? And that also includes your children.
Yeah, I think the cast, I think I was incredibly lucky because they are supposed to be kind of frightfully dreadful people. And this is the class system I grew up in. I'm not saying all my friends are like that by any means, all my friends and family, but there's pieces of references throughout. But the fact is, it's revealed later in the story that Annabelle's character is the way she is because she had a trauma of her own in childhood. I think what I'm also trying to say is that when you the thing about the upper classes in the UK is that they send everyone to boarding school. They all get sent to Eton and then they end up running the country. And I'm like, how can a traumatized generation be capable of making decisions for the rest of the population? So I am trying to say there's a reason for this behavior that she's traumatized. But Annabelle Wallis, okay, so Kira came on first and Kira, she changed my life. Well, Matthew Vaughn came on first and he was like, this feels like a bit like a working title movie. And I was like, I know, we should. He was like, who do you want for Nella? I was like, well, it's got to be Kira, right? I mean, she's perfect. She's portrayed as like Miss Perfect in the UK. She's had to occupy that role for many, many years. And I think it's interesting then with that, with an audience expectation of what you're going to see in a Keira Knightley movie. So it was a miracle that Kira said yes. And she's been interviewed and she said she was hormonal. So the fact she was hormonal when she said yes, but she did still do the movie. So I think she wanted to do the movie. It wasn't just hormones. But Kira was amazing. And then a lot of people came on board because I think some actors read it and went, oh, you've got to be kidding me. There's no way we're working on this. And in fact, Matthew Good was one of the actors who read it and went, I can't do this. This is insane. And then he came back a few days later and said, I can. I want to do this. It's like our line producer read it and went, no way, this is offensive. And then 2 days later, it was like, I can't stop thinking about it. I've got to work on it. So I think a lot of the actors were really excited. They found the dialogue, the characters refreshing. I think it gave them something to do. I think I'm proud of the fact a lot of the actors have something to do on screen. And they wanted to work with Kira. So I think it was a mixture of, I probably wouldn't have had the amazing cast had we not had Kira on board, but I think they also loved the script. And on set, they were just amazing. I mean, Annabelle, she really went for it. She was brave. Kira was brave. Matthew was brave. Beautiful Shoppe, Kirby, amazing. We had Rufus. We had, just the Lily Rose.
Yeah.
Just this delightful, beautiful, like Matthew Vaughn calls her character a millennial. She's a fucking millennial. She's got to die. But she embodies the younger generation, that mid-generation. So we've got the kids, we've got Lily Rose's generation, then we've got the adults. So I think it's nice to see the three generations living together. So I couldn't have been luckier with the cast. They were exceptional.
Yeah. And so, okay, I've read interviews with you about how this was not written during the pandemic, but it has unfortunately come out during a pandemic. And so, like, what has that experience been like for you to have written this, like, really dark movie about death and just the end of times, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh, Jesus God, there's a fucking pandemic on top of everything else. Like, what has that experience been like for you with this movie? Because it really adds a whole other layer of a lot to the film.
I think it's a shame. I think there's two things. There's obviously those making it during a pandemic. I mean, I definitely did not write it. I wrote it in 2019. Mm-hmm. I wrote it, we came off Jojo Rabbit. And I was on the set of Jojo Rabbit because I mentioned briefly earlier, I've been trying to make films for many, many years. And when I was on the set of Jojo and I saw Taika working with comedy, I was like, I get it. I'm gonna try using comedy. Because I think when you're talking about horror, I think all my stories have been horror in a way. They might not have been kind of slasher horrors, but they've all been kind of very dark, disturbing stories. And I thought, oh, maybe if I use comedy, that'll make it easier. But we started filming and then the pandemic started to slowly come into the UK. And then we ended up wrapping 2 days early because our government went into lockdown on the Monday and we wrapped on the Wednesday. Wow. So that was one thing, was obviously as we were filming, like making sure that people, like, was this a real threat? Was this actually going to come? Was it going to leave Wuhan and come into the rest of the world? So there was trying to juggle absolutely concentrating on the movie, and then this threat coming in and then making sure everyone was okay. And then in post, it was that very early stages of the pandemic where we didn't really know what the rules were. It was just like, stay at home. All the billboards said, stay at home, don't leave your house, stay at home, isolate, isolate, isolate. So we didn't really have enough of the reference of how long. We didn't know then, obviously, what we know now, which was how long it was going to last, how many people were going to die, how the medical workers were going to have to carry the world. So it was very, very hard to take that knowledge that we have now and put it into the film. But what I definitely did not anticipate was this whole anti-vaccine conversation. And for me, it's very painful because firstly, I wrote a film that was intended to be semi-traumatic, but it wasn't supposed to traumatize an already traumatized world. But obviously, if you make a film, everyone's invested a lot of time and money into that. They want it to be released. So I think it's a terribly, terribly sad thing that it's come out now. I don't think it helps the film. I think it works against the film. So I think if you were to take it out of context and just put it out there in a world that we were used to 2 years ago, everyone would be experiencing this in a very different way. But this kind of I get very annoyed and frustrated about the whole anti-vax reference because, of course, I haven't made an anti-vax film. I mean, it's ridiculous comparison.
Is that what people are saying?
Some people misinterpret. I mean, I shouldn't put those thoughts in your head, but some people misinterpret the whole question, the boys questioning or trust in government. I mean, the film is supposed to be questioning trust in government, but people seem to have forgotten that we had, you guys had Trump and we have a ludicrous conservative government. Like, we've really screwed up things. But now the vaccine's out, everyone's like, oh, we've forgotten what idiots they were. And I'm totally pro-vaccine. But there are some references of like, he's questioning authenticity in science and la 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 la. So some people misinterpret it. Not everyone, but a few people. But yeah,
it does seem a little bit of a reach.
In a roundabout way. I think it's a shame. Obviously, it's very painful to think that some people, I think maybe for some people it's actually very healthy because they can talk about this. Everyone's bored of talking about the pandemic because everyone's still stuck and everyone's still, some people are suffering more than others, but maybe it's a chance to actually talk about facing death. But I didn't want to already upset world, if that makes any sense.
Does. Absolutely.
Oh, yeah. But the Bublé thing, we can talk about that in a minute if you like.
Yeah.
I would love. Oh, yeah. Tell me more about Michael Bublé.
Okay. So when I wrote the film, there was no Bublé in the film. There was no that opening scene when they're all coming to the house. That's like we shot later in the post. We came back and did that because we missed some scenes at the end because we had to lock down. Yeah. And Matthew was like, we need to see them arriving. And I was like, well, I didn't write that because you wanted me to keep the budget down. And I knew that was going to cost money. And he had written a Christmas song with Gary Barlow. Do you know who Gary Barlow is? He's an incredible songwriter. He used to be in a band called Take That.
Oh,
do you know Take That?
I do know that. Yeah.
Yeah. Take That was my teen boy band. They were like one of the first major boy bands apart from the Beatles. He's an amazing songwriter. So they'd written this song and he said, oh, who do you want to sing this song? I think we should put it in the movie. And I was like, I didn't think anything of it. I was like, I don't know, Michael Bublé, he's Mr. Christmas. And then 2 months later, he's like, got Michael Bublé. I was like, oh my God, how did he do that?
What the fuck? That's so cool.
Yeah. And I was like, that is amazing. I don't know how, Keira Knightley. Oh yeah, she's read it. She likes it. Bublé. Yeah, here's the song. So I was like, wow. So what I am grateful for is that he obviously wanted to put his Christmas song in the movie, but he did let me bring it into the parody and to play with it as the film continues. But it didn't originate with the original film, if that makes sense.
Well, I mean, like you said, Michael Bublé is Mr. Christmas, and I feel like having that song really adds to like the comedy of Christmas being like this over the top, joyful, like it just adds to it so much. I love it at the beginning because you're like, it's so sweet, like sickly sweet in a way. Mm-hmm. Like that feels like a very Christmas movie. And like, everything's going to break bad very soon. And it's incredible. Yeah. Like that kind of like that vibe is just incredible. Yeah.
It is. It's a saccharine song, isn't it?
Yes.
Yes.
Very, very catchy. Very catchy.
But it is very catchy when they're all dancing to it. I like very much me with Christmas songs. Like, I don't want to dance. And then you find yourself like tapping or like swaying a little bit to it. And you're like, God damn it.
Yeah.
Damn it.
Yeah. I don't know if Michael Bublé knew what the movie was about though when he sang the song. Well, anyway, thank you, Michael Bublé.
Yes, thank you.
They keep it.
Yeah, he did a beautiful job, right?
That's amazing.
Okay, so we've talked about your career in Silent Night, but Camille, what movie did you bring with you today that scarred you for life?
Well, it's interesting because as we were having this conversation, I was like, there's loads of them, isn't there? There's loads of that scarred me life. But I think one of the direct references perhaps for this film was Where the Wind Blows. And it wasn't directed by Raymond Briggs. I looked it up again the other day. It was actually directed by, we must give the credit because...
Oh, Jimmy Murakami?
Yeah. Wait, so Where the Wind Blows, it's a cartoon. Now, what do you call it? Do you call it a cartoon or do you call it...
Yeah, so let me read a quick synopsis of this super quick just to catch everyone up for those who aren't familiar. But When the Wind Blows is it's an animated film from 1986 where a naive elderly British royal couple survive the initial onslaught of a nuclear war. Really uplifting shit.
Oh my God, is that the famous Murakami?
No.
No.
But he's done a bunch of other stuff. But yeah, this is not...
So Raymond Briggs was a famous cartoonist. And he, when I was young, I don't know if he's still alive, actually. He wrote these beautiful cartoons called The Snowman.
Yep.
Yes.
And Frank the Bogeyman. And actually, I'm glad you know what The Snowman is. But a lot of people, actually, I speak to in America, haven't heard of it. But it was a beautiful cartoon.
The Snowman.
Of a little boy making a snowman and they go flying together on Christmas Eve or whatever.
I love that one.
Yeah. So when I watched... which came first? No, I think actually When the Wind Blows came first. Or maybe the book came first. Anyway, when I watched When the Wind Blows, I wasn't expecting what I saw. And it's a very powerful film I found about these, like you said, this two elderly couple who were working class in the movie. And they're living in a little cottage during a nuclear devastation, no? Yeah. Like I said, I haven't seen it for many, many years. But I remember watching it and thinking, and that was the first time I understood what a nuclear war was or what a nuclear attack was. And that, I think, is why it traumatized me the most, because that was my introduction to nuclear weapons. And I never recovered because I was like, because they don't make it in the movie, do they? They don't. No, it's a very brutal.
It's very brutal. It's brutal. Well, do you remember how old you were when you first saw this movie and like kind of like the situation surrounding why you watched this film?
Well, it came out in 86 and I was born in 74. So I must have been 12 then.
Okay.
I mean, yeah, I must have been 12. I thought I was younger. So that's interesting. Must have been 12. But I remember that they were just trying to kind of make it. There was a real innocence to this elderly couple. They had no manipulative or unkind characteristics at all. They were just rather innocent. And I remember thinking how tragic that was, that they were just trying to survive this godforsaken horror they'd been given. So I think it was, yeah. Well, you've just watched it, you told me. So what did you think?
Ooh,
Are you blowing? When the wind blows, she's going.
When the wind... Well, I texted Terry and I was like, of course she picked this movie. Like, paired with Silent Night, I was like, of course she picked this film. It's incredibly animated. It's beautiful.
Yeah.
It has the vibe of a kid's movie at first.
Yeah, that's deceptive about it, which is why I probably watched it.
Yeah, it's very deceptive because it has, like, again, like with the snowman and the bear. I didn't realize that he also did the bear. Like, has that very kind of like childlike quality. It's rather simple. It's like, it's deceivingly simple animation. And this couple, they're just two pretty like normal older people, and they're just going about their day, making tea, doing the washing, cooking dinner, reading the newspaper. And it just seems so normal. And then it's completely disrupted in the most heartbreaking way because they want so badly to live in denial that nothing is happening.
There you go. So I've completely stolen the story unconsciously as a 12-year-old. Yeah. Isn't it? But it really, really, I think it's powerful. I mean, you've obviously just described it perfectly, but it really, really shook me as a kid. Yeah, sorry, Terry, you go.
Well, I was just going to ask, do you remember I'm curious how you felt, because the last half of it is so different from what the setup is? I mean, yeah, there's the threat of nuclear war and whatever, but then afterwards you were slowly watching these two older people basically succumb to radiation poisoning and die. And so I'm curious if you have any thoughts about what you might have felt when you were watching that movie, or how that kind of affected you.
I know it affected me greatly, because I remember it was, I mean, I think I must have watched it before I was 12 years old, because I knew there were bad things in the world before then. But I remember I had that sense of doom, thinking, well, we're all fucked, excuse my language. Like, we're fucked. Yes. Like, we can grow up, we can pass our exams and learn how to play cricket and, potentially become adults. But really the world is never going to be the same again. I remember for me, that was a fundamental turning point where I was like, we've had it, and I suppose there's a cruelty to when you describe it like that, there's a cruelty to the story, which I think it says it was one of his best-selling books. I was like, wow. He brought his cartoon out at the right time, unlike Silent Night. But I wanted to see what Raymond Briggs said about it, but I should have done my research before we spoke. I wonder what he said about his own book. But anyway, yeah, it changed my world.
Well, you said that it came out at the right time, and this what kind of didn't surprise me, but what I started looking into, because I was like, I remember I was born in 81, so I'm an 80s baby, but like I remember the sort of like threat of nuclear war at that time. I remember us hiding under desks for like earthquakes, but like also there was that sort of like, what do you do if the bomb drops, or that's something something like that were to happen. And I also started thinking about how there was a lot of nuclear proliferation movies of the 80s, and including like The China Syndrome, The Silkwood, Testament, Threads, War Games, The Day After.
Oh, Threads. Whew.
Like all of these, there's like a whole list of movies that I pulled from IMDb that came out in between and around this animated movie. And I feel like it's such a smart time to release it, but also kind of horrifying that it's like almost like animated and it feels like it should be for kids.
Yes, I think that's what's interesting is, so maybe in a way what he did is what I've done. Maybe I just unconsciously I've copied him, but I thought I was watching a cartoon and people think they're watching a Christmas movie. But it says here, blah, 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 blah. Living in rural Sussex, which is where I live, by the way, the characters in the film. John Mills and Dame Peggy Ashcroft as Jim and Hilda Bloggs, an elderly married living couple in rural Sussex. Blah, blah. It says here, the film's release was timely, capturing something of the mood of the decade. Just 9 months before the film's release, the Chernobyl disaster shook the world.
Yeah. Oh,
that's true too. Yeah.
Okay. Well, actually, they did bring that film out in a very traumatic landscape. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, and so also I wanted to bring up, so there's two other films that I thought about with this one, Barefoot Again and Grave of the Fireflies. They're both Japanese. They're anime movies. They're from Japan. And they're made more from the experience of the directors, of their families experiencing the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. But this made me think of that with the kind of use of animation in terms of taking an atrocity and interpreting it in a way that feels a little bit more distant, I guess, because animation is it's not real, it's not the real world, so there feels like there's a distance from it. But there's also this like, because animation is usually associated with kids, there's like this really weird kind of like, oh, it's not going to be as bad, and then the animation's like, just kidding, it's going to be horrific, and we're going to like interpret the horrors of nuclear war on camera with like people's skin getting like sloughing off and the vomiting and like bloody diarrhea. Like, it's just fascinating to me. Again, it's like obviously the decade, people thinking about that, but the way animation and Grave of the Fireflies and Barefoot Again were released in the 80s too, and like that kind of use of animation in that time period to really convey a different reality, I think, of nuclear war, which I think is fascinating and horrifying at the same time.
I think what you're saying in a sense, what I'm taking is that they're very clever because they take a genre. So you take an animated film, the genre is animations made for children, right? Mm-hmm. And because it's less graphic, because it's a cartoon, they can exaggerate and turn up the volume on things. And I think that is really So very helpful. And I think that is what we did with our film, is you take the Christmas comedy genre and you go, okay, this is your expectation. Now, when someone has an expectation, I don't think it's good to manipulate. I don't think it's good to missell something, but I think it's useful to be able to take a genre and an expectation and kind of turn it on its head.
Well, that's how I felt when I watched this, because I watched this for the first time yesterday, and
oh wow, okay. You signed up for something, you didn't know what you were doing.
that's
Are
the way.
you doing Silent Night, or do you mean this?
When the wind blows. When the wind blows.
Oh, yeah, sorry, I think meant Silent Night.
I saw that back during festival run, and I absolutely loved it. But no, so when the wind blows. First time I watched it yesterday, and I think I was being disarmed by the animation, because I was like, oh, it's a very cute animated style, like you both have mentioned.
It's very cute.
It's two old people that look like they could be my parents, and that was what really affected me as an adult, was watching this and thinking about these two elderly couple, because my parents would be around the same age as them, sort of like trying to go about their life, and they don't necessarily know everything, because what kind of made me it's played for kind of a little bit of a disarming laugh in the beginning, where he's talking about he misconstrues the bomb going off with like the Big Bang Theory. He talks about the Big Bang Theory as if like this bomb going off is that. And so there's that kind of misinterpretation of what is actually happening that comes with the naiveness of them. And that is how I see my parents. So like I was disarmed. I was like, oh, this is really, I mean, it's kind of depressing in the beginning, because it's like they're talking about nuclear annihilation, but it's also my parents on screen. And then it starts to like slowly undo that expectation of what it means to be an animated movie. And by the end of it, they're like, there's radiation burns on their legs. They're getting gaunt. There's like dark circles. Her lips are blood red. And she's like, oh, my gums are bleeding. Like the way that they're describing things is worse than anything that they could have shown. And it was like, it really kind of fucked me up yesterday.
Well, just like her very plainly saying, I had the most terrible diarrhea this morning. I was like, why is that disturbing me? Like, it's not that, like, it's like diarrhea is not a disturbing thing, but in the context of this movie where she's just like, says this, and it's like, oh my God, it's over. It's just, it's heartbreaking.
That's how I felt. I remember feeling that as a kid. I remember feeling like, if they weren't safe, then who's safe? Because there's an innocence in them. I think what was brilliant is that there's an innocence. They don't have any ulterior motive. They're not guilty of social crimes. They're not guilty of any injustice. They're just victims of something horrific. And I think when you're talking about your parents,
Oh, sorry. No, you continue. Sorry.
No, you go. I just think that's what's so clever about it, was like, you see children are innocent, but what you get with these older people is you get them expressing the horror by going, like you said, on my lips are bleeding. I've had terrible idea. I mean, it's heartbreaking.
They're such regular people. Like they just like, oh yeah, you're retired. We just live in this little cottage in the middle of nowhere. And like, you see a little bit of a flashback to their life. That's very sweet and ordinary. Like they got married and they just had kids and they just had like a sweet, normal life for them. But then they also, what is also really fascinating is how they talk about how they survived World War II. Mm-hmm. And they're like, oh, we survived the bombings during World War II. So like, we can deal with anything. And like, it's like in their heads, they're like, oh, we've gone through much worse.
Well, they also,
like, fuck.
They look at the past with like rose-colored glasses. Like there's one point, I don't know if you remember this at all, Camille, but there's one point where they're talking about how like, oh yeah, it was really nice at the war, meaning World War II. They're talking about the shelters, the blackouts, cups of tea, but they're talking about it as sort of like a nostalgic rose-colored view of what the Great War, was. And so that kind of hangs over this movie with a pall, because they're, even after the bomb is off, they're like, well, we survived. And it's like, that is not the same as the bombs that went off in World War II for most places outside of Hiroshima. But there's that aspect of it. And then they're talking about, oh, I wonder if the Ruskies are going to invade us now. And I'm like, that's not what's going to happen after someone drops the nuclear bomb. No one's going to be riding up. But like, he's having these fantasies of like when he was back in the day, back in World War II, of like, yeah, I'm going to fight them off if they come to the house. And I'm like, I don't think that's what's going to happen here. But it's that innocence.
So you would understand the film better than me now, because I haven't seen it since I was a kid. But would you say, because I'm trying to see quickly if there's a quote, what was he saying in the film? Obviously, other than the horror of nuclear war. But what do you think what was his message?
I think it was sort of like the way government and the powers, because one of the quotes that the main male character, James or Jim, goes around saying is the powers that be. He keeps talking about how the powers that be is going to save us. The powers that be is going to like come through here. They're going to come and save the day and ride in. We just need to hold out until the powers that be figure out what to do. And so there's that aspect of it that goes through the whole thing, because one of the things is that they have is all these pamphlets, and the pamphlets talk about you need to build a shelter by taking doors and putting them at a 60-degree angle. And he, is like, well, I need to get a protractor. So he goes through all of this aspect of all of these things that are supposed to protect them that have ultimately either made things worse because they've taken all the doors off their house to like make this fort. Or it's like it's
anti-government. It's an anti-government.
It's an anti-government film, and I also think it's like anti like just thinking that God's going to save you, because by the end of it, they're at their wits' end and they're praying as they die.
But like the other thing too is that they have pamphlets from like the county government, and then there's the pamphlets from like the federal. I'm saying federal, like it's in we're in the fucking United States, but from like the federal government, and like everything's different, and they're like, what the fuck are we supposed to do? Like, what shelter are we supposed to be in? Like, what is the right thing to do? And they don't actually really know what the right thing to do is.
Yeah, because the governmental pamphlets are telling him to get rid of all the cloth on the windows, whereas the county pamphlets are telling him to put white strips on the wall, on the windows. And so there's like that kind of like, no one knows how to deal with this, but we're just going along because this is what the government says is going to save us at the very end.
Also, kind of funny, like Silent. I was going to say a little like Silent Night of like take the pill.
Yeah, I should have watched the film again when I was editing it. I should have watched it again. It's interesting because you don't really think of these things when people ask you later, when you're doing the press. But I don't even know if Raymond Briggs is still alive. I should try and get him to watch our film and say this is all your fault. No, I'm joking. I'm joking. But he. It's fascinating that man's mind could go from the snowman, which is total innocence,
I know,
to this brilliant, because I suppose that is a parody as well, isn't it, really?
Well, and so I will say, you talked about how, his movie came out at the right time, and you're saying that Silent Night's coming out at not the right time. But I'm thinking, okay, I think that Silent Night coming out during this time is incredible, and like I know that some people it's like people think it's fucked up, but I think it just adds a lot of really interesting context to what's going on. But I feel like in a couple years people might be like, it's the perfect pandemic movie, so you never know. Like in a couple we're a little bit more removed from the situation. I feel like even more so, I feel like people will look at Silent Night like When the Wind Blows and being like, holy shit, like these movies just capture like our capture our cultural context, even if you didn't mean to necessarily capture the cultural context of the pandemic. I think it still captures the cultural context of everything going on in the world regardless. So I don't know, I just was thinking about those parallels while we've been talking about the movie.
Well, funnily enough, having just now looked it up, it did come out at the wrong time for him as well. But he obviously made the film before Chernobyl happened. I obviously wrote the film before the pandemic happened. But the fact is, both of us were going, well, there's a lot wrong. And I'm not the only one. There's a lot of people going that the world is in crisis. And the pandemic has come out of that crisis, right? And has exacerbated the crisis we're living in. Yeah. So I'm able to talk about anything, anytime, anywhere. Like, I'm not afraid of talking about things. But I think, generally speaking, one of the reasons why I wrote this is because people don't want to have these conversations. So I was like, okay, stick it in a Christmas movie. Maybe they'll have the conversation afterwards. So I hope so. I do think it's like, at what point do we go enough is enough? Like, we can't pretend that everyone in Afghanistan is okay. We can't pretend the refugees in the Europe camps are okay. No, they're not okay. We're okay. We're very lucky to have our lovely homes. But, it's like, at what point do we go, okay, we can't all be activists and we can't all be charity workers, but what can we do to have the conversation? So I think that is very important. And I'm grateful that you're saying this is actually a great time to release the film. But unfortunately, you understood the film perfectly, but you can't always explain it. So when the film's misinterpreted, I should stop caring that the film's misinterpreted by people. I should stop caring about that. I shouldn't care at all. But yeah, I agree. I don't think I can expect to make a film that's kind of so controversial and then be offended when people they're like, what the fuck is this?
Hey, at least they're talking about it. I mean, I know it's like I don't know. I have not made a film, and I obviously cannot speak from that, but it's like people are talking about it at least. Like you're reading all the reviews, and that's an absolute nightmare, and I'm sorry.
No, but I'm grateful that people are talking about it. I'm grateful for that. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah. What else did you want to ask me? Is there anything else you want to ask me?
So I want to talk about some of the images in this movie that like have linger. I can't stop thinking about it. I guess it's only been a day, but I still can't stop thinking about it. Where when the wind blows. So there's this moment where they're talking about how they have insurance, so like everything in the house is going to be paid for, and how like this is all going to blow over by Christmas. They're having all these conversations about how like we just
the post will still come tomorrow. Don't worry, Terry.
Right, the post is going to still come. There's that kind of focus on these little minute things that are going to, everything's just going to be fine. The bomb's done. It's over. Everything is we can move on with our life now. And while this is happening, they do such a great job of showing the truth, where the camera is now panning over destroyed buildings, destroyed towns, destroyed cities. And there's this one sequence where there is a bird that is dragging itself along the ground because it's unable to fly. And it's just like going around in circles, like trying to escape, and it can't. And I was like, oh my God, out of everything in this movie, that is the thing that like I can't stop thinking about. This poor bird that is dying and is unable to fly, and it's stuck on the ground.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And
it's also in the two characters, James and his wife, who he calls affectionately Duck. So they're having this conversation, and he keeps saying how like only the fittest will survive the nuclear holocaust that just happened. But then they're also talking about how the insurance, will cover everything. And he's like, well, you can't expect things to be normal after the bomb. And then they're also saying like, well, the post hasn't come yet. And there's another comment that she, his wife, Duck, talks about, where she says that there's a terrible smell of burning. It's like roast meat. And his response is like, well, everyone must be having Sunday dinner early because of everything. And it's so darkly comedic, but also very upsetting, because when you start to think about, no, they're actually smelling roast humans, like people are burnt to a crisp, and they're attributing it to Sunday dinner.
Oh, it's bleak. It's really bleak. I'm sorry I made you watch it.
I told my fiance, like, oh, I have to watch this movie for the podcast recording. He's like, oh, what's it called? And he read the synopsis, and he was like, oh boy, have fun. I was like, thanks.
He didn't watch it with you. That's hilarious.
No, he did not. He opted not to watch this movie. He was like, I don't think I can do it. I'm like, that's fair.
I know. I'm actually going to watch it again. I don't think I'll make my kids watch it. I think I'll let them off. But I think I should watch it again. But did you see the front page of the picture book? The original cartoon book has the two old people standing, and you've got the mushroom cloud and the cloud. I think it looks a little bit similar to our cloud, but I think we had our chicken, Belinda the chicken.
Belinda the chicken.
Yeah, and we had different endings where potentially Belinda could still be alive. I'm just trying to get the image up. So there's obviously a lot of the film that stayed with me after all those years. But if you Google When the Wind Blows and the cover comes up, you see this big cloud and then the mist behind them. And they've got a cup of tea. So it's a very good inspiration, I think.
Yeah.
I hope other people watch it. Yeah.
Yeah. It's available. So it's only an hour and 24 minutes, and you really, it flies by, but also your heart breaks the whole time, because it does a really incredible job of depicting like the complete breakdown of these people's bodies without it being super graphic. Like, it is not a graphic movie, which makes it even more upsetting. I think, because it's just like, the animation just becomes like, their faces become like they have like very plump looking faces, like very happy, plump older people who are just like loving life and having a great time in the country, but their cheeks start like these lines appear to show their cheeks getting sallow, and her lips are red, and then they have bags under their eyes. Like, it's very, very basic kind of things, but really make a huge difference in their transformations over such a short period of time. And it's just very harrowing.
Where did you watch it?
I watched it on Tubi for free online. I just found it online. It's streaming it's streaming in a lot of places.
That's good to know.
Yeah, and there's a local boutique Blu-ray manufacturer here in the States called Severin Films, and they released it as part of they have like a kids line, and they released it as part of their kids line.
Oh my god, that's the thing. It's not a.
That's an incredible joke. I feel like that's an incredible joke.
It is an incredible joke, which is how I ended up watching it. That's extraordinary.
Well, they also released the Severin Films. They also released Threads, which I have not seen. I own, Oof. But have you seen it, Camille? Have you ever seen Threads?
No.
It's kind of, I would say, similar, where it takes place in Sheffield. Is that how you pronounce it? England?
Yeah.
And it's about the effects of a nuclear holocaust on a working class city and the eventual long-term effects of nuclear war on civilization.
Oh, wow.
And so it feels like the adult version.
I haven't seen it because nuclear stuff freaks me the fuck out. Like, I know, like I watched Chernobyl during the pandemic.
Yeah, that was incredible.
And it's incredible, but it's really hard. And I think I don't realize how much nuclear stuff scares the shit out of me until I watch things like this. And I'm like, I can't, like, it's too real. And so I always like, and I'm similar with war movies. I love horror movies. I can watch the nastiest shit with a slasher, but war movies just like push me over the edge. Like, it's too real. That happened. It can actually happen. And I think it just upsets me so much more than any horror movie.
Yeah.
Like, I cannot watch any horror movies. And this, like, very much was, like, scarred for life. I know that Terry sent me a text and he was like, the podcast is over.
I'm officially
scarred for life from this movie. We're done.
You're very brave individuals, because it's like every time you're inviting to be traumatized endlessly by your people who you invite on. Yeah,
and generally it's like, it's movies that are like, oh, I can see why they were scary when you're younger, but now, this one was very much like a, Jesus Christ, I'm confronting my own mortality on a Saturday night.
Yeah. When I was pregnant with the twins, I said to my husband, I didn't know I was pregnant with twins. I said, oh God, I feel really, really ill. I think I feel like Rosemary's Baby. I feel like, so all these horror films always kind of like stay with you, don't they? I think if you're pregnant or you're having a baby, don't watch Rosemary's Baby. It's kind of a thing. It's like what stays with you, what horrors like linger in your mind, basically.
Part of the reason I think that this When the Wind Blows works so well is the cast, because you have Peggy Ashcroft and you have John Mills as the two main characters, and they
very famous actors,
right? Yeah, and they commit so much, and it feels so natural, but the banter between the two, that like it feels like really a real couple just sort of going about their day, and I imagine like how like my parents are, where they're just going about their day, and then around them is hell, potentially breaking with COVID. And so it kind of brought me back to that moment and hear about the way that misinformation and the way that everything, because here in the States in particular, we get conflicting information all the time, because the government might be telling us to do one thing, but then we might be in a very red state that's telling us, no vaccine mandates, none of this, none of that. And so I felt for these characters so much, because I see that misinformation that we see today was also an issue with their lives back in when the threat of nuclear proliferation was at its peak, I think. Yeah.
I mean, I think he's saying exactly what we're all saying, which is like, how do you trust the people in charge? At the end of the day, how can a government protect you for something absolutely awful like a nuclear war? Are they doing their best at protecting us from the pandemic? They are now, but they were completely lost, weren't they, at the beginning of the pandemic? They didn't know what the hell to do. I watched the other day, I've forgotten what it's called again, Contagion again. And I was like, oh my God, the government take all the instruction from Contagion, the social distancing, the testing. It's like they haven't got a clue. I'm sure they all sat down and said, we need to watch Contagion, so we need to make a plan. It's fascinating how clever Contagion is when you realize, when you watch it now in a pandemic, you go, wow, he really understood something that no one else understood. The research that must have gone into that film was so clever. It was so accurate. Have you watched it recently?
I have not.
I refuse. I was going to say, you're brave for watching that, because a lot of people I knew were like, yeah, I rewatched Contagion. I'm like, I will not touch that right now. Yeah. I can't do it.
It's so accurate to what we've experienced.
Yeah.
And it's so and literally, actually, I think someone said to me the other day that actually some of the UK government did sit down and take instruction from the film, but it feels like they had to take instruction from it, which is fascinating. Really fascinating.
So do we want to give When the Wind Blows our rating out of 5?
Yep, that sounds good to me.
So Terry, how many of Duck's best cushions out of 5 do you give this? Her precious cushions that she could not have get fingerprints all over and have them get ruined in the bomb.
That was one of the other moments that like stuck out to me when I on this first watch of the film is they're taking apart their house and they're building this very small triangular shaped bunker, I guess, in their living room. And the instructions say to take the cushions. And so he wants to go take the cushions. She's like, not my good cushions. I don't want to get fingerprints on them. And so there's that kind of dichotomy of like, no, I don't think it's going to matter where those cushions are at. It's going to not be good. But I think that kind of explains how powerful this movie actually is, because it takes the innocence of what these two couples have, but also if you're a kid watching this, and if I had watched this in the 80s, I would have been just as innocent as this older couple. So it ties into, I think, how kids view the world, where everyone is telling them, get under your desk, it's going to be okay. You know, if the bombs go off, just hide under your desk, everything will be fine. And that's basically how they're doing. So there's a connection between how the schools and how the government would teach kids to prepare for earthquakes, nuclear proliferation, whatever the case may be. And I think the way that this movie plays with expectations and disarms you by being a cartoon, but then going so far into just sadness of watching this old couple die is just really well done. So I'm going to take 4 of Duck's best pillows and use it to make my own little fort and cry. What about you, Mary?
Amazing.
So I'm going to have to take 4 of her cushions and then sadly cut one in half and have half of the cushion.
She's not going to like that.
No, she's not, but that's okay because she sadly put herself in 2 paper bags and looked like a sack of potatoes, and it's so fucking sad. Like, I'm a huge animation person. I love the medium of animation and what it allows you to do. And this movie kind of really illustrates that about what you can do with animation and the stories you can tell and the ways you can weave imagery together to create these really fucking devastating movies that are about some of the hardest things in the world. And I think it's a beautiful film. I never want to watch it again. But I'm really glad I did. It is just beautifully captures kind of like what it means to be a person experiencing this tragedy. It's not someone trying to save the world. It's not someone under extraordinary circumstances. It's just 2 people just living, and it's absolutely devastating, and it's beautifully done. So 4.5 Duck's best cushions. Camille, I know you have not seen this in a long time, but what do you give When the Wind Blows? How many of her cushions do you give this film?
Well, for me, I suppose the question is like, how important is this film? And I feel like it's saying something really significantly important. And I can say that the effect it had on me, and maybe it wasn't intended to have an effect on a child, but the effect it had on me was like everlasting and ever enduring. So that deserves an awful lot of applause. And I think, I can't remember the details as you do, but I agree with you. I mean, I think we have to literally put it right at the top now. So we're doing it out of 5, are we?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
So I'm going to give it 4.5. I'm going to take away half for the trauma it inflicted on me.
That's fair.
As I'm doing right now on other people.
Well, thank you so much, Camille, for joining us to talk about When the Wind Blows. Do you have social media presence? Where can our listeners find you? And what do you have coming you'd like to share?
I've literally just turned my Instagram into public, but I have a very boring Instagram account. And I've just joined Twitter. Yeah. So what's your handle? I think it's Bonton Griffin, I think. Let's have a look. I think it is... I think it's just Camille Griffin, but there's lots of Camille Griffins at Bonton Griffin, all one word.
Followed you. Perfect.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you for today.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, and so your movie is currently playing. Do you have any plans for any follow-ups right now for your movie?
Well, my plans for tonight is in 40 minutes I'm going to meet a friend who's going to see the film in our local cinema because there's a Q&A, so I'm doing that this evening.
Oh, nice.
But in terms of films, yes, I'm hoping to make another film with Kira. next year with Searchlight are making that with us, with me. And that's that's a sci-fi, would you say a realism sci-fi or a lo-fi set in a future state? And I wrote the idea about 10 years ago. I wrote a treatment on and off, kept trying to juggle this treatment and getting the world rules right. And then after I finished Silent Night, I sat down and wrote it, and I'm really happy with it. But it's set in a future where a generation of children lost their parents to illness, weirdly enough, and the government inflicts parenting laws like a Big Brother state. And the main character is a parental license officer, and it's about her relationship with a system that she believes in, and when the system turns against her. Ooh. So that's
light and cheery stuff.
Really happy stuff. Yeah. Really happy stuff. So hopefully that's next. Yeah.
Sweet.
Cool. So listeners, you've heard from us, but we want to hear from you. What was your experience with When the Wind Blows? Send us an email at scarredforlifepodcast@gmail.com, or you can reach out to us directly on Twitter. I'm at MB McAndrews.
And I'm at Gaily Dreadful.
And of course, don't forget to follow the podcast on Twitter at Scarred Podcast.
And please don't forget to review, rate, and subscribe.
Thank you to Eric Power for our artwork. Thank you to Sean Keller for our music. Thank you everyone for listening. Please stay safe out there, but most importantly, stay creepy.
And until next time.
Won't somebody please think of the children? Somebody please think of the children. Somebody please think of the children.
Acast powers the world's best podcasts. Here's a show that we recommend.
What is The Briefing Room?
It's a behind-the-scenes look at how the criminal justice system works and the lives of the people within that system.
If you love true crime, well, these are the real people who do the job every day of making sure justice is served.
Hi, I'm Detective Dave.
I'm Detective Dan. Together we have decades of experience in local law enforcement, a profession that we think is often misunderstood.
So we're going to explore how to do it right, and we won't shy away from when it's done wrong. These are stories you'll hear nowhere else. Unique, frank, and unvarnished.
From the team that brought you Small Town Dicks, this is The Briefing Room. Episode 1 drops on August 30th. We'll meet you in the briefing room.
Acast helps creators launch, grow, and monetize their podcasts everywhere. Acast.com.